All right, good evening, everyone. So we'll get going, and I just want to let you know this is my contact info. I'm always happy to field questions. Feel free to drop me a line if you have any thing you want to know about Deciduous. Oops. Where's David? It's not working. Okay, I'll switch over. Swipe, okay. All right, here, okay. So, for the new people, Nebari, you might not know, what is a Nebari? Nebari is a Japanese term for where the roots of a bonsai emerge from the soil and connect to the trunk of the tree. So I pointed out right there, that's a Nebari of a bonsai. The above is the generally accepted term, but it's somewhat loose and open for interpretation. There's no single English word that I feel fully encompasses the Japanese term. Hence, I like the term Nebari, but you will hear people talk about bases and stuff, and they're talking about Nebari as well. But to me, Nebari encompasses everything. Base could mean a lot of things. So creating a nice Nebari is a lot of work. Why would you want to do it? So here I'm going to lay the case. And if your tree doesn't have a good Nebari, that's not the end of the world. But here's the case for why make a good Nebari. So artistically, the goal of most bonsai is to tell the life history of that tree. That's the artistic side of bonsai. Older, more mature trees likely have more story to tell. So we tend to want to depict our bonsai as old, mature trees, not as younger trees, though you can do that. Tap roots and a coarse root system are actually a juvenile feature of most deciduous trees. Not all of them. There are exceptions, but it is something that younger trees have. An older tree will tend to diversify its root system into a Nebari, and the goal is it wants to connect with other trees, and it's stronger to interlock their roots versus to have one tap root. So said most of that, so I'll skip to, for most deciduous trees, this type of root system is both more efficient at gathering resources, and it facilitates interlocking and more structural stability for the tree. So here's a few Nebaris just in the landscape. One from the National Arboretum, took that picture. The other one is an Eastern Cottonwood right near my house, and that's my wife with a Sitka spruce in Tillamook. So even old conifers, actually, forest ones, will develop a Nebari over time. Here's some more nice Nebaris. Now I'm always on the look when I'm out and about to see a nice Nebari in the landscape. So how can we create beautiful Nebaris in our bonsai? We have established that for most deciduous trees, a Nebari helps us artistically, and it's a normal morphological occurrence at maturity. But how can we make them in bonsai, and how can we speed up the time to get one? Luckily, there are many methods at our disposal, the application of which depends on the age and particulars of the bonsai. So not all of these techniques are going to be applicable to where your tree is at in its life history or the particular situation you're at, but you have many techniques to choose from, and the earlier you start, the better. So for very young trees, there's tree selection, root pruning, root positioning, burying the Nebari. And then for a little bit older, there's girdling, scarring, air layering. The little bit older, there's grafting. A little bit older, there's root girdling. And we'll talk about each of these tonight. So techniques as bonsai age. The age at which a technique is viable to apply to a bonsai is not set in stone, but some techniques do lose efficiency as the tree ages in and out of their applicability. So air layering, as a bonsai matures and develops bark, trunk girth, air layering will create an unnatural appearance because the roots will lack thickness, taper, and age of the trunk. You'll always be able to tell that the trunk is 30 years old and the roots are 2 years old. Root grafting, those techniques are great, but they require a tree that is a sufficient thickness. You can't take something that you just rooted last week and then graft another root. You just don't have the structural size. So because our bonsai age in and out of certain Nebari developing techniques, if you do desire a nice Nebari, it's paramount that you decide that you want that when the tree is young, because you will, not one of these techniques generally will give you a perfect Nebari. You'll have to apply an ensemble. So yearly root training. If your deciduous bonsai does not already have good roots, it is very important to take advantage of the repotting season. Unlike branching, there is only one chance that you get to work on the roots of your tree per year. So it has to be a priority. So, you get several chances per year to work on the top of the tree, but you can't dig it up in July and work on the roots. So the first technique is tree selection. So if you only have $20 to spend on a tree, you want to get the tree with the nicest roots. So if you go to nursery, look around and see what has good roots. So that picture on the left, that's a crepe myrtle. That was from Home Depot, and I selected that out of all the stock that they had when I was a kid with my mom. The middle one is a Chinese elm. I took 25 rooted cuttings. 2 of them had roots like that. This Chinese elm was actually in the back right there. And the right one is in a Amur maple. My friend gave me 20 seed-grown trees. I threw all of them away but one. So you have to be kind of cutthroat because you don't want to get into the habit of having a million trees, but none of them have any potential. So nursery stock, only select trees for bonsai that have the makings of a convincing Nebari. If not, there should be a very convincing reason that you're purchasing the tree. Cuttings and seed stock, a small percentage of seedlings will naturally develop the makings of an excellent Nebari. Select those trees for training. Discard, use, give away the rest. And something interesting is that thicker cuttings with more nodes are more likely to develop a radial root system. So when you're taking your cuttings, if you want to have a nice root system, go for thicker cuttings. All right, so when a deciduous bonsai's Nebari is in development, each year's work must be a concise decision because you only have one shot, so you need to have a plan for every tree. Root pruning triggers adventitious roots to form, just the same as back budding from branch pruning. It creates meristematic tissue that can form adventitious roots. For young trees, annual root pruning can be enough to form a beautiful Nebari that will have that old look. So if you start really young and you just prune the roots every year, you're going to get back budding just like the top. Root positioning can be just as critical to telling the story of the tree as placement of the branches. Wiring roots is obviously impractical. Luckily, there are other techniques. This is called an Ebihara board. A dentist in Japan who's a deciduous artist invented it. So you can see the similarity between like braces, kind of interesting. So obviously it's just a board, and there is there's actually a nail screw that goes up in the center, and then you can position it, and all of your forces are balanced out by that screw, so you can put some torque on it. The board also prevents downward growing roots because the tree wants to grow its roots down. So I cut all of these off because if you saw this before, this root was just immediately going down. While in development, deciduous should generally be planted over a board for preventing the roots from growing down. So, using the Ebihara board, it's also possible to bend the roots vertically. So these are turnbuckles that I'm using on this bald cypress to actually bend these roots down. So there's a little stone under there, and I'm pulling it up and holding that in place with a nail to bend the roots down. More simply, and this is what I do now because the Ebihara board's time consuming, you can use chopsticks and wooden wedges to position roots. So this is a gamble oak, a southern crabapple, and a river birch that I'm all positioning the roots with little pieces of wood. You have to keep the design in mind. So perfectly radial roots may or may not be the goal, depending on the look you want to achieve. So for example, this tree is going to be a leaning over tree, so it's not as critical that I have roots on the bottom as right there. All right, so a great technique to use while root pruning is scarification. If you have a gap in your Nebari of a younger tree, a section of the cambium can be removed to form meristematic tissue once it starts to heal, and then roots will emerge from that location if you have a little bit of fortune. While a root will not always form in the scarred location, it drastically increases your chances that one will. Lastly, your bonsai's Nebari should be completely covered so that it stays moist until the Nebari is completely finished. If you would still like the possibility of roots to form, then you do not want to uncover it. So I see this a lot. It depends on your goal. You might really just want to put a tree in the show, and that's totally fine. But if you want to keep developing the Nebari, if you expose it before all the roots have formed that you want, nothing's going to form in the open air unless it's a ficus and 100% humidity, you know. So this is an American styrax, and on the next slide I have a picture. So that this is going to be the same location. So see how I have three roots right there from where I scarred it. So that took 1 year for those to form, and now this styrax has a 360 root spread. So for girdling techniques now, all girdling techniques rely on interrupting the tree's ability to transport sugars down the stem and into the roots. It encourages the formation, again, of meristematic scar tissue, which is undifferentiated cells. And the meristematic tissue, when it's covered in a moist environment, such as soil, can trigger the formation of roots. So the washer, to do this is a washer technique on a cedar elm. You obviously have to do this before these branches form. So I placed this washer the previous year. As the tree grows, it will impinge upon the washer, and the phloem will be cut off, and the roots and the meristematic tissue will begin forming. If a moist soil environment is furnished, as I said, root formation can start. So on the next picture, here is 1 and 2 year results of the washer technique. So this is a aspen, American hornbeam, and a Canadian redbud. One important thing to note too is it's very helpful to put a piece of plastic under, because it prevents the roots from immediately growing down. So you can just see there the washer right there. You can see it right there too. So really cool technique for younger trees. For older trees, an air layer is a fantastic way to get a radial root system as well. Let's see. Remember the previous discussion about the age of techniques. So you're not going to be able to air layer a bonsai that's, you know, 1/8 of an inch thick. This is obviously a little bit older technique. An air layer is executed by cutting a ring of bark and removing a section that is roughly 2 times the diameter of the trunk. And you want to go longer, usually, to prevent the chance of bridging the cambium. And it is also important that you cut deep so that the whole cambium is removed. And if in doubt, you can cut deeper because the xylem usually runs pretty deep. Air layers should be done in late spring when the leaves have hardened off, and that's when they appear waxy and just their full size potential. An interesting branch should be picked because you don't want to take full advantage of the technique, so you don't really want to do something that's just nothing going on above it. So here's an air layer that I did of a Mexican plum. Again, I used plastic, because if you don't, the roots will form right there, and then they'll go straight down. So, and you may find you have a mature tree with good qualities, but it only has several thick roots, and they're few and far between. In this case, individual roots can actually be girdled with the same effect as the main stem of the tree. The execution of the girdling of large roots is the same as an air layer, except that the technique is performed on the roots. Rooting hormone can be applied and can help your results. So this is a trident maple. So I could air layer it up here, but then I'd lose all of this nice trunk flare. So instead, I decided to girdle the roots on it, and then I'll have nice roots there, and hopefully they'll fuse. And last of the girdling techniques is a cool one. There are situations where air layering, the washer technique, and root girdling are not applicable. In these cases, the best of the trunk can be the base of the trunk can be cast in concrete to affect the same situation. After this technique functions the same as the fender washer on a seedling. On older techniques, this technique should be used only as a last resort, because older trees, they don't put on as much mass overall as younger trees. So you're looking at a longer prospect. All right, so for grafting, a bonsai may have a reasonably nice Nebari, but noticeable gaps that do not match the flow of the rest of the Nebari. In these cases, grafting techniques are the best solution. Grafting techniques can also add secondary rootage to bonsai when reducing the root spread is needed without cutting back to primary roots. So it's a little risky to cut back straight to a primary root. So sometimes if you have a really nice tree and you want to be conservative, you can graft a root closer to the trunk. Root grafts require the trunk to have a minimum diameter of about 1/2 inch. So trees can age into this technique and still, if they have gaps from the other technique. So you could, for example, the washer technique might not have filled out your root spread completely. You can do the washer technique, then once your tree is a little bit thicker, you come in and you graft in a root to just finish it off. Let's see. After a couple of years, the cambiums will start to fuse, and the leaf end of the whip of the graft can be removed. Thread grafting is best performed in late winter or early spring, but it can be done during other seasons as well. The thread grafts tend to work best on smooth-barked species. So if you want to thread graft in the summer, you can do it. You just strip off all the leaves, and I'll have a picture here. So if you see, this is actually connected to that. So I drilled a hole into the tree in winter where I wanted a root, and I selected a seedling that looked had an appropriate root going in the right direction, and I threaded that through. And this is a root graft, and this is a root graft. And here's another picture. You can see all the roots coming out. And then the technique that I mentioned earlier about root grafts being used to add feeder roots to primary roots closer to the trunk. Here's an example of that I did on crepe myrtle. So this was field grown when I lived in Texas, so I had very big roots that went out very far. So I took cuttings and then I grafted them in closer to the trunk. And this is 2 years after. You can see they've fused. And then you can safely cut back, and I've since cut back to right there. All right, roots can also be grafted by approach grafting. Approach grafts are executed by cutting a channel into the cambium of the bonsai where you would like a root. A seedling with its cambium exposed near its base is placed in contact with the bonsai and secured, often with tying or a nail. In 1 to 2 years, the cambium will fuse and the leaf end can be removed. There are pros and cons to approach grafting. It tends to work better for rough-barked species, but the scarring can be more severe compared to thread grafts. Lastly, you can actually move roots. The roots of the bonsai itself can be grafted to the location where you want. This technique is executed by cutting a channel into the cambium where the root is desired. One of the tree's own roots is then ran through the channel and secured via tying or nailing. This technique is good for avoiding challenges of getting grafted seedlings to grow onto a mature bonsai. So one of the problems that I've run into over the years is if you have a bonsai with a nice canopy, the shade under it's really dense. So how do you get a seedling to get going when you thread graft it? So this avoids that issue. So I actually use this on this tree because of that very issue. So, and I can report, I don't have a picture of this, but one of them fused, the other one didn't. So I'm still better off, but keep going. All right. So the final thoughts. The Nebari of a deciduous bonsai is often overlooked for training, but it is artistically important to tell the story of the bonsai, and it should be prioritized. There are many techniques to create or improve the Nebari of a tree: pruning, positioning, girdling, grafting, and burying. However, most are only executable once a year, and you lose options as the tree ages. It is usually much faster, as quick as a few years, to create a great Nebari on a young tree versus fixing one on an old tree. So I've created many great Nebaris on young trees in the time that I'm still working on fixing a tree that I could afford to buy that had bad roots. So deciduous bonsai with great Nebaris are much more beautiful and valuable than those without. It's just the nature of the beast. Like conifers are potentially more valuable with a cool piece of dead wood. It's the same with deciduous bonsai. And you're not going to see too many or any, I would even argue, at the national show that are competing on a high level that don't have a nice Nebari. So plan ahead with your cuttings and other supplies. So if that's why I mentioned the planning. So if you know you want to thread graft seedlings to a tree, then that means you have to be thinking about that the previous summer. And then remember, deciduous bonsai is a process. So a lot of people compare it to an investment account versus a yamadori. So you're investing a little bit every year into it, and you're getting compounding interest as you move on. Here's a couple references. And then here's a couple nice Nebaris. These are Dennis Voitia's trees. So both of these won a national show, and you can see both of them have nice Nebaris. This one's a Washington hawthorn and a Japanese maple. And open to any questions. I tried to go a little bit fast to give Austin some time. Sure.
Just since you're deciduous focused, developing, like in my garden, I always feel like deciduous is a bit challenging because of like the wind and other things. Do you have any? I mean, it's not specific, but I think if they're growing well, everything seems to improve. Any tips for growing things like Japanese maples in Colorado where they can get desiccated, or like how do you as you're kind of progressing great deciduous trees, how do you make sure they end up looking good all year?
Right, that's a great question. So I lived in Texas, and everybody wants to grow a cool Japanese maple, right? Because they look beautiful. It's the classic. My number one piece of advice is don't fight your climate. So I would advise you, don't grow Japanese maple. Grow Rocky Mountain maple.
Yeah. So you don't have any Japanese maple?
I personally don't. I have 2 greenhouses. So I have Chinese elm. You can't leave that outside here. But that's not a great answer to build a greenhouse. So windbreaks, definitely, keeping stuff close to the fence. Another thing that's easy to do here is the hail is a big issue. So making a hail structure. I rotate my plants out of the greenhouse because I feel like they develop better qualities quicker being in the elements. So I take them out of the greenhouse as soon as I can, and I have a hail structure. And they're close to the north side of a fence, so it blocks some wind. Definitely tie everything down. Another issue here that I haven't encountered anywhere else is the bunnies. My first year here, and when you're developing, little trees, your whole next year's plan could be based on one bud that hasn't even emerged. And the bunnies just rolled in and they cleared out 50% of those buds. So I was like, all right, I got to build a fence around it. So I built a fence. So main piece of advice is, focus on things that are in your climate. Like I think I'm having great luck with aspens and hackberries and things that can already take this sort of abuse. And then things that what can you do? Do you live in an HOA? Do you not? If you can build a hail structure, build a hail structure. If you can have an optimal position on your house, put them on that optimal position. Putting stuff closer to the house to get some thermal mass. There's a lot of things. I want to do a talk on winter protection, but we can talk more after too if you have more.
But your advice, like trying maple, I feel like I have things that I've had for years that are kind of moving along, and maybe it's best to move those on.
Yes, unless you're really attached to them. If not, have a small collection so that way you're only taking one or 5 trees in and out. And then focus on the deciduous trees that are native to the environment, which is hard. There's one thing that I'm interested in because we have a lot of cool species here, just nobody's pioneered them yet. Yeah, Paul?
Kind of tying into this, are there species that you found with root work and air layer and everything else can work better, or some that are challenging? Have you noticed differences between species?
Yes, I find that the higher water mobility species tend to work a little bit better. So I'm having better luck with aspen versus gamble oak. And then just things that are really vigorous. So gamble oak has been a real challenge just because you basically get one flush of growth. The roots are kind of the same. There's not much activity versus hackberries grow really quick. I just started Rocky Mountain maple this year. Those grow really quick. If you're into bushy things, I'm got into wax currants this year. So also prunus do well because they grow really quick, multiple flushes. So we have a native variety, Prunus americanus. So yeah, I'm growing 8. We can talk more after. And I'm especially the arborist folks, I'm looking to hear more about other native trees that I haven't thought of. I had another question.
This might be a little bit off base, but you mentioned you have to work with aspens. Any tips?
Sure. The main thing is don't let things eat the first flush of growth. So so fence, a lot of things seem to like them. They don't seem to be very robust if they're damaged in an uncontrolled way. My understanding is they don't have a lot of defenses for fungi because that's just not their survival strategy. They're like, all right, we'll kill this stem. Let's move on. Let's grow another one over here. That's not good for bonsai. So if you can protect them from uncontrolled injuries, such as like falling off a bench, tie them down. And then they, as much sun as you can give them and almost as much water as you can give them. Yeah.
It looks like you're repotting your deciduous trees, at least the young ones, every year, and you're bare rooting.
Right.
And then how many years do you do that until you have a great Nebari?
Yeah, so basically until you have a great Nebari, I have found that once a tree reaches about 10 years old, they don't like to be repotted every year anymore. They'll start declining. So that's a good question. So I've had my trees that are around 10, I now switch to every other year, even if I would like it to be every year. But until they're about 10 years old from a cutting, you can do every year. Yeah, so it's always a busy. I have 140, so busy repotting.
So do any of these techniques work better at achieving trunk flare base?
Yes, they do. So the washer, well, I'll start off by saying the earlier you can get nice roots, the better. So the techniques that you can apply when they're a seedling give you the best root flare. So I'll go all the way back as we're talking, and I'll show you. This one. So I mean, this one already has a good root flare, and it's only 3 years old in that picture. So just imagine that over 20 years. And then the ones that girdle, they also you're creating a scar there. So it's packing on more tissue to heal it. So they're naturally going to give you a root flare, versus if you grafted a root onto it, it's not giving you that same injury response.
Every once in a while, like I have some Janella maples, and I'll get a little sucker come off of a root heading out, and I generally let those run for a year or two, because I feel like it's kind of bulking up the base and the Nebari. Is that correct, or should I be cutting those out?
Oh, I've never thought about that. Oh, I'm supposed to be repeating the questions. Where was my sign? Okay. Question was, there's suckers on the roots. Should I be cutting them off, or should I let them develop thickness? I would leave them on to let them develop thickness. I've never thought about that happening. I have an Acer Janala, so this one's an Acer Janala, and I'll take off the suckers on the base if I don't want it to be multi-stemmed. But I think that's a cool technique. I might even add it to my talk about increasing the taper on it. Yeah, great technique.
I've got a very young crab apple that's probably about a pencil size trunk, and it's not a candidate for the washer technique. Right now, it really has no life. Do you have any advice for what to do with that one to start developing stuff?
Sure. So question was, we have a young crab apple, about a pencil thickness, so too much branching for a washer. What can we do to develop a nice Nebari? So I'm in this same situation with some of my trees, and I am just marking them now to be cement girdled. So that's where you would apply the cement. And like I mentioned here, the cement technique will actually work better on your tree than it will on this bigger tree. So I have several trees like that they're starting to have a little bit of taper, a little bit of branching. I don't want to cut it off for the washer. So I'm pulling them all aside and going to have a cement day.
And the roots grow out over the cement?
So they'll grow across the cement, and then they'll grow down once they reach the end. But some people I've seen will use this as a way they'll actually do an air layer, and then they'll put cement around it. And the point is that the roots can't penetrate the cement, so the air layer will work a little bit better, and you'll end up with a better flat root spread. Yes, no problem. So the question is, in this example, would I be repotting this and putting a pot around it? so that roots can develop. Is that correct? Yes, yes. So that's exactly it. Once you see that the tree is starting to produce scar tissue, then you come in with a pot around it, and you have 2 pots, and you fill it with soil. And then the roots will start to occupy the second pot. And then once the roots have formed, you literally just cut off the old root system with a saw.
Let's say in theory, a guy had a machine shop who can make a custom washer any size you want. What size would you say that starts topping out at?
I have found that at about 1.5 inches diameter, the trees just don't put on as much new cambium each year. So I would say it probably stopped being effective at about 1 inch. And the question was, if you could have a machine shop and you could build any size washer, what size would be the limit? So I would say you get diminishing returns at 1 inch. So this technique really does work better the younger the tree is, just because they're relative to their original thickness, they're putting on so much cambium each year. I like the questions. I can keep them. I think we have time. Let's keep them coming. If any more, no dumb questions. Oh.
So if you're thinking about like deciduous trees that have done really well, I know we talked about aspen. I've heard, like, I don't have a number of maple, but I've heard they tend to do well. But like what would be your top suggestions for good deciduous?
Speak up, nobody can hear you.
I'll repeat it.
So what would you recommend for deciduous trees in Colorado that can handle the wind and stuff? Native trees.
Right. Okay, so the question is, what trees in Colorado, sounds like specifically the Front Range, would I recommend deciduous material that responds well to the environment? So I'm getting great luck with aspen, and because it's a pioneer species, it grows quick. I am getting great luck with northern hackberry, Celtis occidentalis. They just seem to be tough, able to withstand the wind, and very cold hardy. I just got Celtis reticulata, netleaf hackberry. I'm pleased with the cold hardiness, so I would also recommend that one. Going a little bit out of the Front Range, but still native to North American, there are some cultivars of red maple. The Sunset red maple is one of the most cold hardy, down to zone 3. And it performs very well, has a nice leaf, handles the temperature fluctuations very well. David Fletcher just gave me a balsam poplar that I think is pretty cool. And that one is one of the most cold hardy trees in the world. You mentioned Amur maple. That's the most cold hardy maple in the world. So those, I've had great luck with them being outside. It's just protecting them from the bunnies is the main worry. And also Prunus americanus has done well. So it gives you a little short list. I'm planning on developing another talk about winter protection, and I want to have a section of what deciduous come. So I'm glad that I'm getting these questions about it. So that's good feedback for that.
Do you need any fruits on the trees to develop, or you cut them off?
Right now, so the question is, do you leave any fruits on the trees, or do I cut them off? Right now, I usually, one of the reasons I like deciduous is the flowers, right, and the leaf color. I don't want to lose out on that experience because deciduous bonsai is a process. So I still enjoy the flowers. I do cut them off so that it doesn't waste energy forming the fruit. If I had a show-ready tree, I'd probably want some nice little fruit on it for a show, though. All right, well, thank you all. No more questions? Okay, great. Thank you.